Good morning from UK Today. I'm Donna Larson. The repercussions of the terrorist attack on America are being felt here in the UK as they are across the world. All transatlantic flights from the UK are still grounded and there is heightened security at all British airports. No planes are being allowed to fly over central London, and flights from London destined for America have been diverted to Cardiff, from where we have this report.
The scale of this atrocity is almost beyond belief, and its effects are being felt right across the world. These passengers bound for LA last night found themselves in Cardiff after American authorities banned all incoming flights. The British Airways 747 was halfway across the Atlantic when news of events in America were announced by the crew.
Most people were just stunned, really. And obviously we didn't have a lot of information.
Well, we got relatives in Canada who are quite worried because we were LA bound. I guess the planes that were hijacked were LA bound as well. So, but no, they know we're all right now.
Gwenda Jones's 24-year-old son Ed is studying music in Manhattan, and though she's been assured he's safe, she's been unable to contact him from her Cardiff home.
My daughter rang me yesterday to tell me about it. She had fortunately spoken to her brother, and he's quite safe, and his American girlfriend is safe, but we're obviously very concerned about them. We can't contact them because all the phone lines are down now.
Wales's leading churchman, the Archbishop of Wales, was just a few blocks away from the trade centre when the first plane struck. The Most Reverend Rowan Williams last night phoned colleagues back in Wales to assure them he was safe.
And the government's announced a halt to all private flights in this country, except where specifically authorised. The move comes in addition to the complete stoppage of flights between the UK and the United States. A decision will be made this morning on whether to end the TUC annual conference in Brighton early because of the terrorist attack on the United States. The Prime Minister pulled out of his keynote speech yesterday, and news of the attacks has left delegates in a sombre mood. A planned speech by a senior trade union leader from America has already been cancelled, and the whole conference may end this afternoon. And the result of the Conservative leadership election will now be revealed tomorrow. An announcement was due today, but it was postponed by William Hague as a mark of respect to those killed in the attacks in New York and Washington. Other news now, and an investigation is underway after a train collided with a lorry at a level crossing in Cornwall. One person was injured in the accident.
The train and lorry collided at an unmanned level crossing on Tregoss Moor near Indian Queens on the Newquay branch line. The train driver was slightly injured, but none of the 17 passengers on the Par to Newquay train were hurt. This stretch of the A39 is usually busy because it's the main diversion for lorries too tall to fit under the iron bridge on the A30, and there have been incidents here in the past. The British Transport Police will conduct a full inquiry into the accident.
Some travel news now, and a reminder that all transatlantic flights to the US and Canada from the UK and Europe are cancelled until further notice following the terrorist attacks yesterday. Passengers are advised to contact their flight operator for further information before leaving for the airport. There will also be some general domestic disruption, with flights being diverted away from London airspace. EasyJet have cancelled a number of services to UK and European destinations from Luton, Gatwick, Liverpool, Edinburgh and Glasgow airports. Beyond that, travellers from all British airports are also advised to allow extra time for checking in because of enhanced security procedures. Details of this are available on CFAX pages 440 and 438. And on the roads, there will be some knock-on congestion. Expect congestion around Heathrow and Gatwick airports because of the cancellation of flights to the US. It's likely to affect traffic on the M25 around Junction 15, the M4 around Junction 4, and the M23 around Junction 9. That's all for now. Bye for now.
% of our planet is covered by water, yet we know little about the seas around us. Now a new series takes you further out and deeper down to show you things that have never been seen before. The Blue Planet starts tonight at 9 on BBC One. Until now, we've only touched the surface.
After the atrocity, the rescue and the reckoning, there are still people alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center in New York. Some have phoned relatives asking for help. Thousands, though, are dead, and many, many more are injured or unaccounted for.
It is 8 o'clock. Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Jeremy Bone and Sophie Rayworth. The headlines this morning: Americans are trying to take in the scale of the terrorist attacks and to understand how they could have happened.
The first accounts have emerged of how the planes were hijacked before crashing into the World Trade Center.
A third skyscraper collapsed overnight in the wake of the blasts. Hundreds of rescue workers are missing.
How will the US respond? President Bush has vowed to hunt down those who carried out the attack.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
Well, President Bush addressed the American nation a few hours ago and confirmed what everybody had feared. Thousands of people have died in the series of terrorist attacks on New York and Washington yesterday. The rescue operation continues, but it's an incredibly dangerous operation with 300 firefighters among those missing.
In his address to the nation, the president made it clear there would be action against those judged to be responsible and those who harbored the terrorists. Here, the Prime Minister is due to start a meeting about now with his defence and security chiefs at Downing Street. Our first report this morning is from the BBC's Jane Stanley with the latest from New York City.
The famous New York skyline, but no longer so familiar. The Twin Towers are gone, replaced by a plume of smoke and ash. This is a city in shock. Its usually packed hub of Times Square, all but deserted, emptied by the news. It is also a city in mourning. New Yorkers are turning to their churches to try to find comfort. Others are in panic. They're stripping supermarket shelves and cash machines. They feel insecure and no longer safe. As emergency teams worked through the night, their citizens came to help with blood for the injured. New York hospitals are packed and preparing for more admissions, but the horrible reality people are struggling to accept that there will be very many victims who will not make it here. The sheer impact of the attack was just too great. The planes had ignited ferocious fires in the World Trade Center towers. People tried to jump to safety. But then the towers collapsed. The debris buried all in its wake. It may be that hundreds of emergency workers were crushed beneath. Paul Lemos took these photographs as he was giving water to the firefighters and police officers at the center. Events unfolded before him.
You can see people standing on the ledges and just one at a time, just falling, jumping, and they would watch them and they would come flying down and their hands would be moving and stuff, and it was almost like they were trying to get help. And then you would just hear the boom, and they were landing all over the place.
New York has not slept. This, the worst night of its life. It is struggling to cope. Lower Manhattan and what remains of the World Trade Center is now effectively sealed off. The emergency work continues, but New York is not the same city it once was. It's now full of panic and of grief. Jane Stanley, BBC News, New York.
Well, it's now just after 3 o'clock in the morning in New York, and our correspondent Jane Stanley can update us now on the situation. Jane, how is the rescue operation going?
Well, we have very, very little information. Most of downtown Manhattan is now completely sealed off behind me. You can't get anywhere near it. There are constant rescue vehicles going, and along the streets leading uptown in Manhattan, there are just lines of rescue vehicles waiting to go in and help and to take out any injured or whoever is found there. They've come, because I can see on the sides of the vehicles, from all over New York State, from New Jersey, people just wanting to help. But there's great caution because of this building, the Salomon Brothers building that collapsed during the night shore time next to the World Trade Center, and of course the fears that more rescue workers could be lost and add to the toll of life.
There have been some horrific stories as well overnight here of the accounts of people who actually rang from some of those planes, managed to get through to relatives on mobile phones and told them what was going on.
It must be dreadful for the relatives, because we know that those people cannot possibly be alive. They went through the side of the World Trade Center, as we saw, but dreadful stories, people calling from bathrooms on the planes saying we're going to be hijacked. Another man called his wife and said we're going to try and take the hijackers down. They were only armed with knives, we understand, not with guns, and they certainly tried to do that with the plane that crashed outside Pittsburgh. It didn't hit any of the buildings. We've also heard stories of cell phone calls from under the rubble of the World Trade Center of people saying, I'm here, please come and get me out. But you can imagine 110 stories falling down. It's hard to try to even locate anybody.
It's going to be a very, very, very long time, isn't it, before New York gets anywhere near back to normal?
I think nobody can really imagine, you know, it's the stock exchange, the whole economic life of the city that was symbolized in that building is completely disrupted. It doesn't function. The subway doesn't function. The streets are deserted tonight. And New York is normally buzzing at this time, and there's a very, very strange and eerie feeling. And I think, as we saw the gentleman in my report there, it's the psychology of people who have been so affected by this. They can't come to terms with what has happened. That will take a lot of rebuilding if it can be done. It's not just about the infrastructure.
Jane, thank you very much.
Well, some reports say that 800 people may have died when a third hijacked plane crashed into the Pentagon. The mayor of Washington has declared a state of emergency in the city.
The end of the day that shook America and the world. After crisscrossing the country for security reasons, President Bush finally returned to Washington with a promise to hunt down those behind the attacks and with reassurance for a troubled nation.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
Even as the president was speaking, emergency crews continued searching through the carnage at the Pentagon just a short distance away. It was the first ever attack on the symbol of America's military might, the anger there palpable.
I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
The attacks had brought the government to a dramatic halt. Congressmen fleeing Capitol Hill for fear of further assaults, but they came back.
One thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together.
As the congressman turned to leave, there was even what appeared to be a spontaneous outbreak of patriotism. Too little too late for some, perhaps. Security in the Capitol has now been increased. There are sharpshooters at the White House, more police on the streets, and new safety measures promised nationwide.
Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites. There will be higher levels of surveillance, more stringent searches. Airport curbside luggage check-in will no longer be allowed.
As often happens here in this most religious of countries, Americans have started turning to their places of worship for comfort and answers to the horrors they and the rest of the world have witnessed. America feels somehow different now. Fortress USA has been breached, leaving a nation feeling shocked, shaken, and decidedly vulnerable.
Well, Rob Watson joins us now live from Washington, where, Rob, it's the middle of the night, but clearly Americans will have been reassured to have seen the president back in the White House at the Oval Office, at least for the duration of that broadcast. Though, does anybody know where he is now?
No, and indeed there are some suggestions that maybe he is not in the White House, which is behind me and mainly dark right now. The helicopter that brought him to the White House after his crisscrossing around the country was seen to take off shortly after his television address. So there is just a chance that he may not be in the White House again for security reasons.
But policymakers in Washington now will be brainstorming about what to do next and who to go after.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt that that is the first priority of the Bush administration and indeed of the intelligence community here, because I don't think there's any doubt that across the nation people are asking what went wrong. Why didn't we, with all of our expensive high-tech law enforcement agencies, how on earth could 4 planes be hijacked? Why didn't we know somehow? Well, President Bush has been trying to assure the American people that the country is running as normal, number one, but number two, that the full force of the US intelligence and other services will now be turned to trying to track down, as he put it, those who are responsible for this attack and to punish them.
Now, Washington, D.C., a smaller and very, very different city to New York City, but the same kind of sense of shock, I suppose.
Absolutely. There were really extraordinary scenes here just after the attacks on the World Trade Center, and then minutes later, the really audacious attack on the Pentagon. I was round and about in the streets of Washington. Thousands of people poured out of federal government buildings. All of them were talking about what had happened. People were in a sense of shock. People were very frightened, didn't want to go back into their buildings. It was a scene of absolute chaos, and if the intention of the attackers had been to bring this country and to bring its capital to a standstill, they certainly succeeded.
Okay, Rob Watson there in Washington. Thanks for joining us.
The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, is meeting defence and security chiefs at Downing Street this morning, but the first official comments have come from the Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw.
Later this morning, I shall be travelling to Brussels, where there will be an emergency meeting of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of the European Union, again to express our full solidarity with the people of the United States, the victims and their families, but to consider the immediate implications for security and the wider implications. For one thing is certain, is that this is an event which has not only shaken the world, but also tragically has changed the world as well.
Jack Straw speaking earlier on this morning, while our political correspondent Carol Walker joins us now from Downing Street. Carol, Jack Straw, the Home Secretary as well, and the Deputy Prime Minister all seen going into number 10 this morning to discuss security measures. Security has already been stepped up quite considerably here, hasn't it?
Yes, that's right, and I think all these measures will be under review. They'll be joined, of course, by security and intelligence officials, giving them the very latest situation. It's noticeable here in Downing Street that the skies are unusually quiet because, of course, there are no civil aircraft flying over central London, and all those sort of arrangements will be reviewed at this meeting as the Prime Minister updates himself on what further contingency plans can be taken.
And he has been expressing, they've all been expressing solidarity with America. Those are their words this morning.
That's right. The Prime Minister came out very swiftly with this phrase of standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. And I think there is a very, very real sense from both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary that we heard this morning that Britain does stand ready to offer support. Now, the Foreign Secretary was asked specifically whether that would extend to military support if there were to be some sort of reprisal attacks. He wouldn't answer that specifically, but there does seem to be a very clear message going out that Britain wants to offer whatever support it can to the United States. And beyond that, that the Prime Minister wants to get other European nations on board. We know that Jack Straw is meeting other Foreign Affairs Ministers in Brussels later on this morning. We know that the Prime Minister has already spoken to President Chirac, to Gerhard Schröder, to President Putin, and that there is a real effort to try to get some sort of united response. What the Prime Minister, what other ministers are saying is that democratic nations must try to stand up against what the Prime Minister has described as this new evil in the world.
Carol Walker, outside number 10, thank you.
Well, there'll be no transatlantic air travel between the UK and the United States today following the closure of US airspace. Thousands of passengers have been prevented from flying until at least tomorrow, where the disruption is expected to continue. Our correspondent James Helm is at Heathrow right now. James, are people turning up for transatlantic flights hoping to try and get on board something?
Well, Jeremy, I think the word has got through that there are no flights across the Atlantic today and possibly not even tomorrow. What the airport here at Heathrow are saying is that all flights to North America are, of course, suspended. And what we saw late last night are people arriving, yes, hoping to catch flights, but then having to find accommodation. So all the hotels around here have been full. 68 flights per day would take off from Heathrow to Canada and to the United States. None of those are flying at all today, and so there's considerable disruption for passengers here. And what Heathrow told me this morning is that anybody who's flying to any destination, including European, African destinations elsewhere, should check with their airlines first before they set off, because there is likely to be disruption, there are likely to be delays.
Okay, James, thanks very much for joining us. And we've heard as well from British Airways, a report from British Airways that flights to Islamabad have also been cancelled because of its proximity in Pakistan to Afghanistan.
And the story continues to unfold in the United States. 3 o'clock in the morning in New York and Washington at the moment. Maura will bring you the update right now.
Sophie, thank you. President Bush has said thousands of people died in yesterday's terrorist attacks. And he made it clear America would respond and there would be no distinction between the terrorists and their hosts in the hunt for those responsible. The rescue operation continues in New York and Washington. People are still alive in the rubble, but 300 New York firefighters and 73 police officers are reported among the missing. The first accounts have emerged of what happened on board the hijacked aircraft that crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Passengers made phone calls saying the planes were being hijacked by men armed with knives. Here, extra security measures are in place at public buildings and military installations. The Prime Minister is meeting defense and security chiefs in Downing Street this morning. Those are the headlines. Back to Jeremy and Sophie.
Maura, thank you very much. Well, let's get the latest weather right now from Sarah Wormshurst.